Today we're working on a Ford F-250 Super Duty with a 7.3 liter Powerstroke engine in it. And we're going to be replacing the turbo. There's quite a few steps we're going to have to take to get started in the process. There will be several components that we're going to have to remove and some things that we'll have to relocate just so we can have a little bit more room to work and make it a little bit easier for that turbo to come out. So we're going to show you a few of those tips and tricks now. And to get started, what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to remove our passenger side battery. We're going to have to relocate our map sensor. Pretty easy to do. We'll just remove the 3 bolts and just set that up top here. We've got our intercooler piping coming back to the turbo that's going to have to be removed. We also have our intercooler piping on the downpipe that's going to have to be removed, along with our breather assembly. That's going to go away as well. We also have a few sensors that are going to have to come off of the Y pipe, and then a couple other things up here in the front that are going to have to be removed and just relocated to give us a little bit more access. Once we get those parts removed, relocated, we can then get a little bit better access to the turbo's piping and get a lot of these band clamps out of the way and kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. After that, we'll of course remove our top cover. We're also going to remove the fuel filter assembly. That's just going to give us a lot more room to pull that turbo out in the end. And if you want to know how to get that fuel filter housing assembly out, we also have another video on that on our channel where we'll replace that. So you can see the steps involved in removing that fuel filter housing assembly that way. So we'll get started removing these components and then we'll get back to it. Now that we have our sensors either removed or relocated and all of our piping out of the way, we can now go to the Y pipe and remove that. We have a clamp at the top and then there's a sleeve on either side holding it on. A little tip on that: if you remove the top band clamp from the left side sleeve and the bottom band clamp from the right side sleeve, and you bring this side out from the sleeve and bring this side out with the sleeve, it'll make it easier to remove and also reinstall. So we'll do that now. Now that we have our Y pipe removed, we've only got a few more steps to go before we can actually start trying to wiggle that turbo out of its spot. You'll notice in the back that I've already removed the hose from the wastegate. And what we have left, we have our 2 exhaust sides that we need to remove. We've got a clamp up front here on the left. There's one further back in the back there. You can use a multitude of different tools to get back there. It's going to be a 12 millimeter. So you can do a swivel ratchet if you can get your hand back there with a 6-inch extension. Either of those will work. Now the turbo that we're going to be replacing this with comes with a new pedestal as well. So we're actually going to remove the pedestal bolts at the bottom, remove our actuator pigtail, and then it just is at that point, again, just a job of removing the turbo. And there's going to be a little bit of wiggling involved. You're going to have to kind of move it around a couple different ways to get it to slide out. But again, once you get those bolts removed, you get those clamps taken off, it's pretty simple after that. It's just a quick yank. Now that the turbo's out, you can see a few things here that need to be taken especially care of. One, we earlier had to replace an oil pump on this vehicle that had a leak, and you can see that here in the valley. So before we reinstall the new turbo, we're going to go ahead and get that taken out, get it sucked out with a siphon pump, and clean that area up. We also need to make sure that before we reinstall the pedestal for the new turbo, we pull these old O-rings out. We don't want to double gasket that, and the new pedestal comes with its own O-rings. So we're going to make sure we get those out and get this valley cleaned out. Another note: while removing the old turbo, I will say that it is much easier to remove the turbo first than the pedestal. There are 2 bolts in the back for the pedestal that are almost unattainable while trying to pull it out with the turbo on. It can be done, but save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle. Just go ahead and get the turbo off first, then that pedestal is just a few seconds after that and it's ready to pull out itself. Now that we can see the new turbo here, there's a couple of things I want to point out about the old turbo. As you're taking the old turbo out, once you get the clamps removed and you get the 2 turbo bolts removed from the pedestal, you're going to feel something else holding on to the turbo itself, and that's going to be this plunger rod here. Very easy to remove that. There's actually a tab. You grab it on the bottom, push back, and now this plunger rod will slide down and come right out. So that's the last thing that's going to hold on to that old turbo as you're removing it. And as I was showing you before, where the pedestal goes in, we have those 2 O-rings that we want to make sure we remove. With this turbo, you're actually going to receive 2 new O-rings for that portion of the turbo install. It's also going to come with the new O-ring for our inlet here. So we want to make sure we use all the O-rings that come with the kit. That way we don't have any leaks and we get the job done right the first time. Now we're also going to go and follow suit with the way that we took the old turbo off. To save us a little bit of time and a little bit of hassle, we're going to go ahead and remove this new turbo from its new pedestal. Make it a lot easier for us to reinstall everything. So we'll pull this off the pedestal, put the pedestal back in first, then we'll put our turbo back in. And again, like I say, it'll save us a lot of time and a lot of hassle. Make it a lot easier for this installation to go a little bit smoother and a little bit faster. Now that we've got our new pedestal back in place, we went ahead and put our Marmon clamps back in position and opened up wide. That way when we get the turbo mounted up to the back sides, we can slip those over both of the ends and get those tightened down to the turbo. I also want to make one small mention here on these O-rings on the new pedestal. You're going to be wiggling and kind of moving that turbo around just a little bit to get it back in place. Be especially careful around those O-rings. You don't want any tears or pinches in those, because the last thing you need is to put this whole thing back together and have a huge oil leak because one of those O-rings has been pinched or torn. So just be very mindful of those and be very careful whenever you're repositioning the turbo to install. And we'll get to that now. Now that we have the new turbo and pedestal reinstalled, we've got our new rubber O-ring in place. It's now time for us to go back through and get all our ductwork back in place, get all our sensors back in place, and get everything bolted back down where it's supposed to be. I will give you one tip here. When it comes to the Marmon clamps on the side and on the back, the side's not too hard to get to and get things readjusted, but that back clamp can be somewhat tough. A little trick I learned here, if you'll take either a 12-inch or two 6-inch extensions, place your socket on the end of it, and hold this side of the clamp, put this on the bolt of the actual screw that goes back into the clamp, and press against it with your other hand while holding this side. You can push it into place a lot easier than if you just try to use both hands or trying to get a couple of pry bars in there. So if you're having a little trouble with that particular clamp, maybe give that a try. And we'll get back now to getting all our ductwork back in place and get back to work. Now that we have the turbo and pedestal reinstalled, we've got our Y pipe reinstalled, we have our sensors replaced. All we have to do now is get our ductwork back in line, get our map sensor relocated back to its mount, get our fuel filter housing assembly put back in place, get our cover on, and put our battery back in. The last thing I will make a mention of here is to make sure the first time you start the vehicle, do not touch the gas pedal. You want to let that truck idle for a good 5, 6, maybe even 10 minutes. Make sure it builds up good oil pressure, because that turbo does not come shipped with oil in it already. So you want to make sure before you drive it, before you hit the gas, before you throw any RPMs at the truck, that it's got oil feeding itself to the turbo. And other than that, hopefully now you've got a better understanding of what it takes to install and replace the turbo and pedestal on a 2002 Ford F-250 Powerstroke with a 7.3 diesel in it.